So on Chavtes Amid Beis, the first of the wide lines, Toshma. Now this Toshma is coming to try to answer the question that the Gemara had posed earlier on this stuff. And as we go along, we'll see how the Gemara tries to navigate through this issue. And the Gemara says the following. There's a Mishnah in Masechet Nedarim on Daf Ayin Daled, Shomeres Yavam, Bein Yavam Echad, Ubein Shnei Yavamim. So whether or not she fell in front of just, let's call him Shimon, or Shimon and Levi, because there were two brothers, Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Yafer. The Yavam can be Mefer the Nedarim. And that would mean that if she took a neder as Shomeres Yavam, either one of these two brothers, each one who has the status of a Yavam, has the right to nullify her vow. That's the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Yeshua Omer, Li Echad V'lo L'Shnayim. The halacha that gives a right to the Yavam to be Mefer Nidre Yevama, that only applies if there's one Yavam. So there's only one brother, Shimon. But not when there are two brothers, Shimon and Levi. And in such a case, according to Rabbi Yeshua, each one undermines the right of hafara of the other one. So no one has hafara. And that would mean that her nedarim are automatically valid. They don't need any approval from anybody. So again, just to review, according to Rabbi Eliezer, it would seem that even if there are two Yevamim, they both are granted the rights to be made for the nedarim. Whereas according to Rabbi Yeshua, neither of them have the rights to be made for nedarim. Rabbi Kiva Omer, the Yavam does not have rights to be made for the nedarim of the Yevama, lo li echad v'lo l'shnayim. Rabbi Akiva goes to the other extreme. And he says, even if there's only one Yavam, which until this point, before Rabbi Akiva steps on the stage, it was universally accepted that if there's only one Yavam, certainly he has rights to be made for the nedarim of the Yevama. Rabbi Akiva says, I disagree with it. I hold that although there might be Zika, but it's not the same as Ishus, and the Torah only gave rights of Hafaras Nedarim to the husband who has Ishus. So the Gemara says, Bishlem no Rabbi Akiva, Sovereign Zika. The entire enterprise of Zika is the Rabbana. And therefore, on a Deraisa level, there's no Zika. And if there's no Zika, then there's no Ishus. Hence, there's no Hafaras Nedarim. And that applies to Afilu Le'echa, even if there's only one Yavam. Le Rabbi Yeshua, I can interpret Rabbi Yeshua, Le'echad yesh Zika, L'trei ein Zika. What happens is that the Zika gets diluted, if I can use that term, when there are two Yevamim. So if there's one single Zika to one single Yavam, and it's undiluted, and it's a very strong Zika, that's Ishus. But she can't be married to two brothers at the same time. So if it's both Shimon and Levi, two Yevamim, we cannot apply the principle of Zika in that case. Although there is a Zika, but it's a lower echelon Zika. And therefore, we cannot recognize the mutual rights of two Yevamim to be matir, to be mefer ha-nedarim. And he quotes here a Bach. The Bach says that Ein Zika means Ein Zika Ma'ula Sheyuchlu Shnayim Lahafer Es Nidareh. Elo le Rabbi Eliezer. Now we get to Akash. We cleared the pathway. We understand Rabbi Akiva. Ein Zika. We understood Rabbi Yeshua that if there are two Yavam, Ein Zika. Well, Rabbi Lazar, the Hinami Diksav Yesh Zika, obviously maintains Yesh Zika. He goes to the other extreme that both of the Yevamim have a right to be made for because Yesh Zika. is Bishlem Elechad. I can understand that there's each to one brother. If there's only one brother who's a Yavam and there's only Shimon, then Mayfair. Ella Litrei. But if you have two Yevamim, meaning you have both Shimon and Levi, is Amai, meaning how could Rabbi Eliezer say that there'll be Afaris Nedara? Now here he quotes from the Yalkut Biurim. He says, Ketzad Omar Rabbi Eliezer Yofer. So we interpret Yofer means each one of the two Yevamim could be Mayfair, any of the two. But he's saying, Amai, Lashon Yachid, the Yofer of Rabbi Eliezer, which is the Lashon Yachid, Mashma, Sheyavam Echad, Yachid Lahafer Es Nidorel. Now, wait a second. Okay, she's Yesh Zika, according to Rabbi Eliezer, but she's Zekuka to two Yevamim, and there's no one that's more, superior to the other. So therefore, the logic, says the Gemara, compelling logic is that both together should be Mayfair, which means that you need both Shimon and Levi to join forces in the fact that there's a Zika from this Yevamah to both of them in order for them as a joint effort partnership to be made for the Nedarim. And that's the best you can do here. But Rabbi Eliezer used the word Yafer. I mean, who is it? Can we single out one particular Ach and ignore the Zika to the other Yavam? And the Gemara answers, Amar Rabbi Ami, Hachabayaskinon, Kigon the Ovid Bei Maimar. This is where it's going to cash in on the original suffix that we learned about yesterday. Ubeit Shammai, Rabbi Eliezer agrees with Beit Shammai, accepts his opinion. The Omar Maimar Kona Kinyan Gomur. Remember, we had two interpretations of Maimar and its definition according to Beit Shammai. One definition was Maimar is a Kinyan Gomur, and she needs a get. She has a full status of an HUC after Maimar. So that one Yavam who jumped the gun, so to speak, he took the initiative and he gave a kesef or shtar for Kedushin. Through this Maimar, she became HUC, she became Ishto completely. And therefore he, whoever he is, whether it's Shimon or Levi, it doesn't matter one iota, he is now the Baal and she is Ishto, and he can be made for an Nedarim by himself as a lone ranger. He doesn't need the other Yavah because he's already made a full-fledged Kinyan Ishus on the Yevamah. So the Gemara says, wait a minute, does that really make sense? Well, it depends on the suffix in the previous sugya. Now we go back to Rabbah of the suffix of yesterday. If you're going to say that according to the Shita Beit Shammai, Nisuin Oseh, then when a person does Maimar in a Yevamah, according to Beit Shammai, and we said it's a Kinyan Gom, it means it creates a full-fledged Kinyan. As we discussed yesterday, when I say yesterday, you know what I mean? We discussed the two halves of Ishus, whether it's stage number one, which is Erisin, stage number two, which is the Suin, and if Maimar is a Kinyan Gomer, it's the Suin, is then, according to that side in Rabbah's understanding of Beit Shammai, now we can understand Rabbi Eliezer. Why? Because Michum Hachi Mayfair as a lone ranger. Because it's up to Nisuin. So imagine, in one fell swoop, we jumped from Zika to Nisuin. At stage number one of Zika, both brothers have the same identical Zika. Therefore, they have identical powers and rights and merits to be made for Nedarim. And there's no justification of Rabbi Eliezer, who says that one of the brothers, and exclusively one of the brothers, makes a hafara. But if I say that the Zika jumps all the way up to Nisuin, through what vehicle, through what chemical bond, through the active Maimar, and Maimar is a Kinyan Gomor, now we have an Nisuin to one. is therefore he can be made for Nadar. But according to the other side, in Rava's Suffolk, in Beit Shammai, namely, that Zika goes up one little notch, only a small notch, with Maimer. And what notch do we climb up to? Erusin, but it's not a full-fledged Kinyan Ishus. Then we have a problem. Why? Now again, before the Gemara is going to quote a Mishnah, but before we read the next Gemara, let's just think about it in our own logic. At this point, if you ask me, everything is glatt kosher. We don't have any problem because through the Maimar, let's call him Shimon, he upgraded from Zika to Erison. Erison makes her into an Ashes Ish. I'll give you a simple example. If she would have a relationship with another man and it's only Zika, then she violates a law, and that's it. Give her malchus. That's the worst punishment you can talk about. But if he already did Maimer and it's a Kinyan Gomer of Erison, then now it's a Chiv Misa. She's a full-fledged Ashes Ish. Again, it's not the Ish's Gemura, but apparently the Gemara is of the opinion that Afaras Nidarim is something different. She may be an Ashes Ish as far as Erison and its achievement, and the Kinyan thereof through Erison is enough to give her a status of an Ashes Ish, but it's not enough to give him the rights of Hafaras Nidarim, because she has not yet entered into his Rishus. What's the difference between Erison and Isuin? With regard to Erison, she still remains in the Rishus of her father. With regard to Nisuin, she enters completely into the Rishus of the Baal. And we discussed many things. If you recall, we spoke about Kvura, let's say, or Yerusha, let's say if his wife dies and it's only after Erison, then he doesn't have to bury her and he doesn't inherit her. All this is suspended until such time as he takes her into his Rishus with the Suin. Hafaras Nidarim also should depend upon the Suin. We need her to be in his Rishus, which is only after the Suin. But Tanan, we have Mishnah Nidarim, he says here it's on page Samach Vavam and Beis, which is a famous parak called Nara Murasa. In the yeshivas, they learn Nidarim very often. They pick up that parak, 10th parak of Nidarim, usually during the summer's month, not during the winter's month. Nara Murasa view Baila Mefirim Nidareha. So it means that after Erison, we can introduce the Arus into the picture, and he acquires, we would say, a partial right of Hafar, but it's not a total right of Hafar. He's not the exclusive Mayfair. He could participate in Hafar together with her father. So now the Nara Murasa is in a limbo state, somewhere between her father and her Arus. And it's like Shnayim Ops and Betalis, they both hold on to her with a Rishus, this one of Av, because before Nesuin, and this one of Erison, because he already was Makadisha. But for him to be made for Nidarim as a one-man show and completely eradicate her neder just because he says Mufar Loch, that he can't do. Erison is not enough. So what are you going to tell me now? Rav is going to tell me, according to Beit Shammai, Maimar jacks up the Zika to the state of Erison, and now I can understand why that particular Yevamot, will call him Shimon, who implemented Maimar, now could be made for Nidarim. That's not really true. Although he does have some rights as a partner, in quotation marks, to be made for Nidarim, but it's not sole rights. He doesn't have complete exclusive rights. He needs the father to agree to be made for Nidarim. So don't tell me he's made for Nidarim. My Mefer B'Shutfis. Although in the original language of the Brisa, Shomeres Yom, Ben Yovam Echad, Ben Shnei Yevamot, Rabbi Eliezer Omer Yefer, or Yafer, which sounds like he does it on his own without any approval, where any need for another partner to approve. That's not so. We're going to have to say Mefer B'Shutfis. He does acquire through Maimar a status of an Arus through the Eris, and now he is part of the picture of Hafaras Nedarim, but he's not the exclusive Bailam over on Nedarim. He will lead the father's jump on the bandwagon, his partnership, his active agreement to be made for the Neder. So the two of them together will be made for the Nedarim. And the Gemara in Masechet Nedarim has a whole suffix. What happens if one of the two is Mayfair and the other one is Makayim the Neder, or is Shosek, and he says nothing? And that has to do with Megas Gaius or Mikloch College. Does it in some way weaken the Neder or not? Different sugyas there in Masechet Nedarim. He mentions here in the footnote of Ramban, She'im Sha'afim he bogeres or shkanesura ein abal yochla first der levado shlo nesrok neschus afar leval levad be'irsin afilu im poka schusa of lahafim. Okay, so this is the famous sugna of nisrokna. Nisrokna means the following: that the father has partnership rights in Hafaras Nedarim, but up until a certain point. When she becomes a Bogeres, 12 years and 6 months old, add another day, she leaves the Rishus of her father. Or in another case, where she already was married off by her father to another man, she leaves permanently the Rishus of her father. And the Gemara now vacillates about whether we say Nisrokna. Nisrokna means we take the Rishus of her husband, the former Rishus husband, which he had when she was a Naira, before she became Bogeres, or before she was Nesua to someone else, and we pass it on to the Baal. The Baal now inherits whatever zchuyos, whatever rights and powers that the father had, now shift over to the Baal, such that he gets the whole picture. He gets everything. However, the final maskana of the Gemara is lo nisrak. We don't say nisrak, which means that the rishus of the Av remains mitla toli b'av. It remains somehow suspended in midair. No one has it. The father forfeited it, but the husband, the Orus, did not acquire it until after the Suin. So he cannot be made for the Nedarim on his own. So the Ramban says that when it says B'Shutfis, it means two things. Number one, if the father still has Rishus over the Nara, if she's a Nara, and she's never been married off before, then we need the father's Shutfis in being made for the Nedarim. Can't do it without a father. And it also means that the Orus cannot be made for the Nedarim alone, even if the father's out of the picture, even if the father has forfeited or the Torah has taken away his rights for the rishus of his daughter because she's already Bogeres, etc., and the Orus does not acquire those rights, lo nisrak the rishus av lebal, and therefore under no circumstances can the Baal be made for Hanadam. He just doesn't have the power to do so. If in event that she's a Nara, etc., then together with the father, as a joint partnership effort, they could be made for Hanadam. So basically, the final maskana here is that there's no proof from Rabbi Eliezer, from the fact that Rabbi Eliezer says that the Yomam could be made for the Nedarim, that Beit Shammai holds Maimer is a Kinyan Gomor of Nesu, and it could be it's only Erisin, and the Baal could only, the Orus, the Yavam, Orus, who did the Maimer, could only be made for B'Shutfis in event that the father still has Rishus over his daughter. Now, all of this is based on one particular interpretation of Beit Shammai, named that Maimer is a Kinyan Gomer. We had another interpretation of one of the Amoraim, that's Rabbi Lazar, and his opinion was that according to Beit Shammai, Maimer is not Kona Kinyan Gomer. And we had a long discussion about that. So the Gemara now wants to ask the following kasha. Ula Rabbi Lazar Diyomer Maimer LeBeit Shammai Eino Kona Kinyan Gomer. And what is Beit Shammai's, what is the status of Maimer according to Beit Shammai? To what extent do we upgrade the Zika as a result of Maimer? It's only Lidchos, Ella, Lidchos, Litzara, which means that if this Yevamot has a sister, it's Rachel and Leah again, then the Maimer to one of the two pushes off the Zika, undermines the Zika to the other sister. So let's say, for example, he gave Maimer to Rachel. Now, Leah she doesn't need Chalitza Yibum. She's out of the picture. Why? Because the Maimer of the Yavam, we'll call him Shimon, to Rachel is Docher, and it undermines the status of the Tzara as a Zekuka Liyibum. So then, if that be the case, then according to Rabbi Lazar, certainly Maimer is not an upgrade of the Ishus, because it's not a Kona Kinyan Gomer. And I believe that what the Gemara is postulating here, according to Rabbi Lazar, in his interpretation of Beit Shammai, Maimer is not even Erison. And therefore, the Gemara asks, "My Mefer b'shutfis." How will he, Rabbi Lazar, justify the brisa of Mefer b'shutfis? We just interpreted that after Maimar, the Bala Maimar, that Yevamot who did the Maimar, together with the father, can be Mefer on the Torah. Why? You haven't even reached the level of shutfis, of heresy. Is a mind made for b'shutfis? I won't even grant you that lower level of maimar ke'eresin to give him shutfis together with the father. I won't even grant you that much. It's not even ke'eresin, according to Rebbe Loza. Whereas according to one-sided Rabbah, Beit Shammai went as far as to say that Maimar is a Kinyan Gomer of Erison. And that's the final maskana here of Nachman, that, again, defending that side in Rabbi Suffolk. But the Maimar is a Kinyan Gomer of Erison. And now it's saying that according to Rabbi Lazar, Beit Shammai didn't even reach the level of Erison through Maimar. And if that be the case, what rights does he have to be made for Nedarim? Zero. Not even b'shutfis with the father. So the Gemara tries to tackle this problem. When did I say this din? That Maimer is Eino Kona, and it's Eino Kona Kinyan Gomer. That's what I said. Ela Lidchos Litzar Bilvad, meaning that I made that very extreme statement that the Maimer is only meaningful to push off the Tzara so that Leah is out of the picture. Right, that Hazika is undermined. And the answer is the Lo Sagila Begita. What I meant lafuke, in other words, Rabbi Luz is saying, I'm fighting against a phantom, like an imaginary bar plukta. I'm fighting against a dissenting opinion that maintains that after Maimar, she needs a get. Again, everything is according to Beit Shammai. That goes without saying. So if you hold Kinyan Gomer, Maimar equals Kinyan Gomer according to Beit Shammai, then she can never get married to any other man other than the Yavam without a get. That's one interpretation which Rabbi Lazar is rejecting. Don't tell me that according to Beit Shammai, Maimar is a Kinyan Gomer such that now she needs a get. It's as if instead of Kesef Shtar, he had Bia with her, which would be Bias Yibum, which would make her into a full-fledged Eishes, which means that she can't get married to anyone without a get. That's not the pshat, says Rabbi Lazar in Beit Shammai. Ela boy nami chalitza, which means if we underline the word nami, he's adding, Rabbi Lazar is adding a requirement of chalitza. He's not denying that she needs a get, because that's what Beit Shammai holds, that Maimar is Koneh, even if it's not a Kinyan Gomer, as Rabbi Lazar is going to insist, and she'll require chalitza. But nevertheless, it is a Kinyan, such that now she requires a get, but the poor lady cannot get married unless she gets both a get and chalitza. Meaning it's not as if the mimer equals bia, which would be full-fledged yibum, which would mean she doesn't need any sort of chalitza because he was makayim the mitzvah of yibum. There's never chalitza after yibum. There's only get after yibum. No, says Rabbi Loz, that's not pshat. That's a mistake. That's a false accusation, a libel against Beit Shammai. Beit Shammai never said that mimer equals bia, equals yibum, equals eishes ish, equals get without chalitza. That's all wrong. Beit Shammai, according to Rabbi Lazar, require chalitza. Certainly they require get because that's the basic fundamental position of Beit Shammai, that mimer is a kinyan, but it's not a kinyan gomer. It's not like bias yibum to completely undermine the zika. And the zika is finito. It's a closed book. We don't have to deal with zika at all. Forget about chalitza. She's now an eishes ish. No. That's not Beit Shammai. You're accusing Beit Shammai of something they never said. But now let's see, in the light of Rabbi Lazar, who says that according to Beit Shammai, she needs not only get after Maimar, but also chalitza. How does that impact on the Yavam who did the Maimar, his rights to be made for Nidarim? Is therefore lahafir nidarea miamrinan. Did I ever say anything to downplay or downgrade the efficacy of Maimar as far as Hafaras Nidarim is concerned? I never said such a thing. You think that I was telling you that according to Beit Shammai, Zika remains Zika, and it's not upgraded at all, even after Maimar. And Maimar is not code at all, kiyuzeh, except to get rid of the Zika from the Tzara. No. That far I didn't go. I agree that there is an advance, an upgrade of Ishus from Zika to Maimar. But she's not an Eishes Ish. The Zika, as far as requiring Chalitza, is still in place, and it's an absolute requirement. She cannot get married without Chalitza in addition to get. She'll need a get for the Maimar and Chalitza for the Zika. But I don't deny, says Rabbi Loso, that going from Zika to Maimar is a maturation process in which we upgrade the Ishus, at least to the status of Erison, which means V'shutvis with the father. He, the Yavam, after Maimar, could be Mefer HaNidarim. And the picture becomes quite complicated because where exactly do you subsume Maimar according to Beit Shammai within Rabbi Loz's frame of reference? On the one hand, It's not bias yibum. It's not a full-fledged Eishasish. She still needs chalitza. But on the other hand, it is an upgrade of Zika to the level of Erisin, where the Torah says that together with the father, the Aris, could be made for 100 done. We really have a number of different dinim. If I were to tell you that a woman needs chalitza from the Yavam, and yet the Yavam could be made for 100 darim in any shape or form, in any partnership, or whatever it is, in any minimum form, you would throw me out. You'd say that's absolutely wrong. You're involved in a self-contradiction. If she needs chalitza, it means that all you have is a zika. If the zika still remains, then she was not upgraded to any status of an Eishazish at all, because if she were, then that would be a full-fledged kiyum of yibum, and she would need to get without chalitza. The requirement of chalitza indicates she's still in the status of skuka and zika, skuka liyibum. If she's a skuka, then the Gemara understands that there's no eris in here. She's not an Eishazish. She's Yevamot l'shuk, and the yavam cannot be made for 100 darim. Very complicated. No, he's saying two different dinim here. One din, as far as the zika that generates a requirement of chalitza, that still is in place. And Maimer certainly, according to Rabbi Elazar's understanding, Beit Shammai could not replace and undermine the zika, and get is enough without chalitza. No, for sure not. That far we don't go. But she is an arusa, and there is an accomplishment through Maimer of Erison, such that now the Yavam, through the Maimer, acquires rights to be made for an Adarm, albeit b'shutfus, as a case of an arusa. If, on the other hand, we take the other interpretation of Beit Shammai, that Kinyan Gomer means literally Kinyan Gomer, it's like a bia of Yibum, and she will need get and not chalitza, then we understand very well why the Baal, the Yavam, who's now a Baal, is made for an Adar. Now the Gemara wants to defend Rabbi Elazar in a different methodology. Rabbi Elazar, the Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak minicha. He's going to turn the question around the other way. You said, well, it all works out beautifully according to Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak because Mefer means b'shutfus, and that means that we upgrade the status of the relationship from that of Zika to Erison, and now together with the father, the Yavam after Maimer will participate as a partnership in Hafara. Minicha. I'm not satisfied with that. Are you satisfied with that? Meek, honey. Let's go back to the Bryce of Rabbi Eliezer. I'm talking about the Tana, right? It says, question mark. He's asking a rhetorical question. It says Yaferu in Lashon Rabbah, meaning that the Yavam after Maimar, together with the Av, they as a team, in plural, will effectuate how far is the Darim. Is that what it says in the Brisa? According to Rabbi Elazar, I'm saying according to Rabbi Eliezer, you got to be careful here by adding the you. According to Rabbi Eliezer, it's b'shutfus. Well, where b'shutfus? It doesn't say Yeferu. Hello, we have no choice. We have to assume sha'amda b'din. Okay, now we take a deep breath. Sha'amda b'din. What happens is, when you have two Yevamim, both vying for Yibum, and both on equal footage, we need what's called Hamada B'din. Right? The situation is intolerable. It's ad infinitum. What do you mean? They're fighting it out. Who gets the opportunity to fulfill the mitzvah of Yibum? And this is going to go on until is the Yisha Golas, until Mashiach comes. So what's the resolution to this problem? So we need what's called Hamada B'Din. And Bezdin have certain guidelines, halachic guidelines, to determine which of the two Yevamim will win the jackpot, will win the prize. So what happens is they grant the rights to one of the two brothers. The other brother pulls out. He says, I'm pulling my chips out. I'm not going to be part of this Yibum. My other brother wants to do the Yibum, and that's fine. Upasku la mizonos mishalo. Another sugya. Now we go one step further. There was Hamada B'Din, and one particular Yavam was singled out for Yibum. The other brother is now out of the picture. But more than that, Bezdin said that she, the Yevama, will be able to eat from the estate of the Yavam. Now, mind you, he's been designated, what do they call it in the American presidency? What's called the president-elect, is that what it's called before he's sworn in? So we have a Yavam-elect. That's called Hamada B'Din. But he hasn't yet done Yibum. So what changed over? And Bezdin went one step further. He, the Yavam-elect, is going to support the Yevama. I don't know why she can't support herself from the estate of her husband. Okay, that requires a lot of study. Maybe there's nothing left in the estate, Lamazogin, just to make life easier for ourselves. And now, this Yavam-elect, who's been selected, he now has to support him. So we're on a higher level. Why? Because Ishus is always measured by psikas mizonos. Who has to support this woman? In a normal case of Erisin, the Eris doesn't have to support the woman. Again, if she has a father and she hasn't left the rishus of the father, maybe she's a Bulgarian, she'll have to knock on doors. I don't know what. Take a job. Maybe babysitters. Now babysitters get a lot of money. Now, once Bezdin has decided, now again, the Pella here is that, when we talk about Bezdin in general, all over Shas, especially in Choshen Mishpat, we always divide between two categories or two concepts. There's what we call declarative, and then there's evidential. Well, what do I mean? Sometimes Bezdin plays the role of invoking evidence, and sometimes Bezdin goes one step further, and they are authorized in a constructive way. Constructive meaning to create through declaration. They declare what we call in the language of Shas a chalos. They actually change the reality through their proclamation. They're not just clarifying, well, we had evidence and we investigated and interrogated the Eidim and we came to this conclusion and so forth and so on. No, sometimes Bezdin plays a constructive role. They construct and create a new status, a new chalos. In law, it's called declarative. Right, so let's say, for example, if you want to apply for a driver's license, so you have to take certain tests, to make sure that you know how to drive, to make sure you have good eyesight, and you hear things, whatever they require. Those are all investigatory. Those are all evidence. That's not enough. At the end of the day, the license bureau, like a Bezdin, has to make a proclamation that you are now endowed with a license. And now that license has it's legally binding. So psikas mizonos is when Bezdin plays a role to actually effectuate a new chalos. And where does it draw an afkamina? First of all, obviously, that she can sue him for support. She meaning the Yevamot, and he meaning the Yavam after Maimah. But not only after Maimah, again, after Maimah plus Hamad B'din plus Psikas Mizonos. But now there's another nafkamina as far as how far as the Nidarim are concerned. Because Bezdin has changed the entire chalos. They have effectuated a change in the relationship. They've upgraded the issues to a point of Psikas Mizonos, which means how far is the Nidarim? How so? Kira Pinchas Bishmei de Rava, the Omer of Pinchas Bishmei de Rava, we have a statement of Pinchas in the name of Rava, that Kol Anoderes Aldas Baila Hi Noderes, which is really fascinating. This sheds a whole new light, this statement of Rav Pinchas, on the rights, call it the powers of a Baal to be made for his wife's Nidarim. We think, it's the husband's rights. He is a Baal. Baal means Baal. Baal means he has Bailus. No. Says Rav Pinchas, it doesn't work like that. It works midin das. She puts a t'nai in her neder. It's like Harem K'dishli Kedas Moshe Yisrael. It's like a t'nai that it's got to be Kedas Moshe Yisrael, otherwise this marriage is not valid. She says that my neder is only valid if and when my Baal agrees to certify my neder, la'asher neder, which is called Kiyum neder, and that's called Kol Anoderes Aldas Baila Hi Noderes. There's a built-in condition. Now, normally a t'nai has to be bepeh. There's no such thing as Dvarim Shebelev, because Dvarim Shebelev lo avi Dvarim. But in certain rare cases, when we know what a person had in mind, that's called an umdina de muchav, then halacha could upgrade a das to a t'nai mefurish. It's as if she had explicated and enunciated this time that my neder should only be valid if and when my husband gives his approval. Now, at what point do we activate this principle of Pinchas that Kol Anoderes Aldas Baila Hi Noderes? And if her husband doesn't want the neder, it's as if she never took the neder, because it's bitar t'nai. And it all has to do with mizonos. He writes here, in the name of some Rishonim at least, that das ha-Yevamot, the Yevamot, after her husband died, took a neder. What was her das in the neder? She understood shenizones minichsei ha-Yavam, that she will be supported by the Yavam. Again, that goes into effect after Bezdin was posek mizonos. And noderes al das ha-Yavam. He's got the box, and he's going to support her. And the neder might impact on her relationship with him. She wants his approval. And her neder is not meaningful without his approval. V'al came, yesh b'kolcho lahaferes nidareha. Get a whole new shot in that first nidar. It's not some sort of inherent koach simply because ich bin the balabas. Don't forget about it. It's all because he's signing the checks. He is supporting me. So she says, I want this neder only if he will approve of the neder. Because that's the nature of the quid pro quo relationship. She doesn't want to violate, his will. She wants to make sure that the neder will not make him uncomfortable, to use a lashon hamata, and that he will be satisfied with the neder. She took a neder to be more religious, so she'll come to shul every Shabbos or something, right? So, he has to approve that neder, and then he says, yeah, that's great. I'm really on board. Very nice. But then she takes a neder, that she won't benefit from vegetables. I don't know what. So that's something that he feels very uncomfortable about. He wants to eat vegetables. He wants her to cook vegetables and eat vegetables. I don't know what. So she's being supported by him. She wants his approval on the net. And therefore, Yesh B'Kolcho, this Yavam, after Psikas the Mizonos, has the Koch Lahafres to the Re'ah. Oh, here are the key words, Baruch Hashem. Afilu ein hamaymer konen. Whole new shot in Rabbi Elazar. When Rabbi Elazar says that according to Beit Shammai, Maimer is not kohen, it's only doche the zika to the tzara, nothing more. There's no upgrade of kinyan. But the answer is, we talk about a case where haneda depends upon him, the yavam, and he can be made for, which means he removes his approval, but not because zika is upgraded as a result of Maimar to a new level of issues. Forget about that. Rabbi Elazar says, according to Beit Shammai, Zika is not Kohen. Narvas, it was Psikas Mizonos. And that happens after Hamad B'Din, meaning we have a two-stage process in which Beis Din changes the whole reality here, in a legal sense. I mean, a legal reality. Number one, Beis Din decides amongst these two Yevamim, both of whom are very good candidates for Yibum, which one is going to be the Yavim? And they have to sort of cajole one of the two Yevamim to pull out. And he says, I give up on my rights to be Yavim in honor of my other brother. Now, we're ready for Beis Din to go one step further, which is called Psikas Mizonos. And once they go that one step further, now we activate the principle of Kol Hanuderes Al Das Baila Hinoderes. So it's really amazing because, if you ask the Talmud Chacham on the street, so to speak, if there's such a thing, your average Talmud Chacham, and you ask him, why does an Arus have rights, and Shutfis rights, but rights to be made for his wife's Nedarim? And he's going to answer you because he's a big lamb, and he's going to say issues. No. We're not talking about issues. We're talking about Maimer Eino Kohen B'Yivama, even according to Beit Shammai. That's Rabbi Elazar's position, but for a wholly different reason. The Yavam in our case, and we can universalize this to every case of an Arus, is made for the Nedarim not because issues, but because Kol Hanuder Al Das Baila Hinoderes. The only thing you could ask me the following question. In the case of Erison, he's not chayav in Mizonos. In Yibum, Beis Din is going to go one step further and exercise their authority to be posek Mizonos. Why? Because Zikas Yibum means we're extending the original issues of the late husband, the late brother. But in an Erison where a man comes over to a woman, they don't know each other. Well, hopefully they know each other, but they don't have any pre-existing Zika relationship, and he says Harei Mekudeshesli, and he gave a Erison, then why should Beis Din be posek Mizonos? He's not chayav in Mizonos. Why would Beis Din have the rights and the authority to go that one step further? And yet, the Arus is made for Nidareh, albeit b'shutfus with the father. Here we're saying that the Yavam gets his rights because of Psikas Mizonos. So you get the impression when you walk away from the sugya that there were really two different roads to travel on, two different mechayvim or mechilim of a chalos of hafaras nedarim. This one through the mechanism of issues, and that could exist even without Psikas Mizonos. And there's another method of generating rights for hafaras nedarim through Psikas Mizonos. He says that this is Rashi's shot in the sugya, but he wants us to research it in the Yalkut Biurim. Maybe we'll make a note of this for other shitos of other Rishon. But in Mirza Hashem tomorrow, we will begin on Daf Lamed, correct? And that's the new Mishnah of Shlosha Achim. Again, when I say a new Mishnah, it's more of the same. Again, 2 out of 3 brothers who are married to 2 sisters, but different dimensions of that issue. And we have here on this Amud 3 Mishnayos. Now, I'm not saying we're going to cover all 3 of them tomorrow, but we'll see. Okay, then? So we'll stop here, and I'll thank you for obliging me with the change of schedule. And tomorrow we're back to the regular schedule. And if anyone's around at around 11:25 today, we're going to learn the end of the Akdama to Tmura. Hopefully make a siyum on that. And then I have an idea for where we want to go beyond that. And then we'll learn Yevamos in the Lamets. That'll be, probably about 10 to 12 for those who could stay a little bit longer. Okay.